Okay, so why don't we get kicked off? We have a lot to go through today. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Narinder Dhami, the founder of New Power Labs. For those of you who are joining us for the first time or are less familiar with our work, New Power Labs is an action-oriented think tank dedicated to expanding access to capital for underfunded and overlooked leaders and communities. New Power Labs is a platform for leaders and organizations committed to advancing equity and capital flow across Canada. We work with foundations, investors, asset managers, credit unions, and banks to help channel capital to historically underfunded and overlooked leaders and communities, unlocking the full potential of our country across all types of diversity, from gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, citizenship status, Indigenous identity, and more. NPL mobilizes funders, investors, and lenders in Canada and are working together to collectively move $500 million to under-resourced founders and groups by 2030. By challenging the conventional norms in philanthropy, investing, and across the capital spectrum, we're working to shift policies and practices and driving systems-wide change. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that myself and New Power Labs, most of our team, live, work, and play in Toronto, now known as Toronto. In Mohawk, it means where all the trees standing in the water. Today, Toronto is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. It is a traditional territory of many First Peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As an organization focused on capital flow towards underfunded communities, New Power Labs commits to partnering and supporting Indigenous communities in our research practices and partnerships. We know that there continues to be a disproportionate impact to Indigenous participation in Canadian economy, and as a result of our history. And there is so much more to do, and we're really only at the beginning of this work and our partnerships with community. So a few housekeeping notes. So we have many of you joining us online. We'd love to meet you, so please do introduce yourself in the chat. The session will be recorded, and as part of when we announce, when we share the final research report, we will also share the video recording for this session. And so hopefully you can share that with your colleagues and share that more broadly. So if you need to turn on closed captions, please click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. To see French captions, click on the arrow next to the CC button to choose French as an option. And the last thing before I introduce our speakers is we will be having Q&A. So feel free, if you have questions along the way, feel free to submit it at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A box. And we'll also save some time at the end so that we can engage in a deeper discussion with all of you. Okay, and with that, I am excited to introduce our speakers. We have Amy Chant, who is the Senior Member Experience Design Manager at Coast Capital Savings. She is a dedicated financial service professional who has spent nearly 17 years at Coast Capital, and will share more about her work when we go deeper into the discussion. We also have Daniel Bernhard, who is the CEO of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. He's a first-generation Canadian who's dedicated his career to public benefit following a short stint in the corporate space. So excited to learn more also about his work and the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. And we have Sifat Yusuf, who is a program manager at Mariam Assefa Fund, and she is responsible for supporting the fund's grantee partners community across Canada and focusing on grants around workforce development, wealth building, and other supports across the last few years in her role at WES. And we'll learn more about CFAT and also the great work that WES is driving. I do have to call out that both WES and Coast Capital are core founding partners of New Power Labs. Daniel, this is where you guys can come in. We can talk about this after, but it's really great to see both Coast Capital and Wes, some long-term partners, as part of this discussion. And finally, we have my colleague Bamboo. So she's our research associate at New Power Labs, where she's channeling her expertise in research and project leadership to drive meaningful change within communities and within the work that we are driving at New Power Labs. So she will share a little bit more about her work as we move forward. So we're going to spend our time today sharing a little bit about context, which many of you are folks who are in the sector, in the space, and supporting newcomers in your roles. So what we'll spend time, I'm going to pass it over to Bamboo shortly, and she'll spend some time walking through the purpose of the research and a few key learnings. The full research report will be available soon. And we'll also be hosting an in-person event in Toronto. So if you're interested in that, we can share more details. We'd love to have you join us for that as well. So with that, so thank you to all of our panelists to be here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Bamboo to walk through some of the scope of our work in partnership with Wes.
Thanks, Narinder, for the introduction. I'd like to start by extending a thank you to Wes for their generous funding, which made this important research possible. So our research focuses on how newcomers navigate the Canadian financial landscape, particularly in terms of credit access. We have identified both the barriers they face and the opportunities that exist. We aim to provide valuable insights for financial institutions, policymakers, and newcomer-serving organizations to better support newcomers. Our research is built on a mixed methods approach, which includes a literature review to understand the current status, the stakeholder interviews with experts from financial institutions and community organizations, a product scan to identify available credit products tailored for newcomers, and product co-testing to assess how these products and the services meet the needs of newcomers at the branch level. As we explore the financial landscape for newcomers in Canada, let's take a moment to look at some important data points. Newcomer population is growing. As of 2021, immigrants make up 23% of Canada's population. Projections show that the number will go up to 28.4% by 2031 and 31.8% by 2041. And these immigrants actually contribute to 75% of Canada's population growth. They also account for 32% of employer business owners, which drives job creation across all sectors. When we look at credit access, there's a clear financial gap between Canadian-born individuals and recent immigrants. For example, 43% of Canadian-born individuals have vehicle loans, while only 14% for recent immigrants. Similarly for mortgage. Despite these gaps, there is growing interest and demand for financial education. According to an Interact survey, 81% of newcomers actually have expressed interest in online courses that covering Canadian banking basics. So there's also growing demand and supply for products tailored to newcomers. The volume of credit originations by new to Canada consumer grew by 46% year of year from 2022 to 2023, showing clearly a rapid expanding market for financial products tailored to newcomers. Now that we have set the stage, let's jump into some of the key insights we will uncover in our forthcoming report in early May. So the access to capital is really critical for newcomers as it directly impacts the financial stability and economic integration. However, it's still a very understudied areas. Thinking about the importance of newcomers are more likely to be credit invisible, meaning they lack a Canadian credit history, making it harder for them to access loans compared to Canadian-born families. And without credit history, newcomers face increased vulnerability as they are at higher risk for financial fraud and predatory lending. However, this issue was understudied as most of the study in the field largely focused on barriers like language, employment, and the credential recognition. Now let's look at how financial literacy plays a role in these challenges. Financial literacy is very important in shaping financial behaviors and credit worthiness. Next slide, please. Financial literacy actually shapes credit, and individuals with higher financial literacy are better at managing debt and avoiding missed payments. Higher financial knowledge is directly linked to responsible credit use, but for newcomers, there's a clear gap in financial literacy. Building on this, newcomers face significant challenge when trying to navigate financial products. From our primary research, we can see that the navigating financial services is much harder than we expected. Like for so many newcomers, a visit to the bank is their first step in navigating the financial system, but the quality of service they received depends heavily on location, staff, and language support. Now let's talk about where newcomers turn for support when facing these challenges. Newcomers rely on social networks and community traditions for financial literacy and to navigate financial decisions. Newcomers often rely heavily on the social networks and community traditions, and beyond formal resources like government or settlement agencies, they frequently turn to their family, friends for advice. Interestingly, research shows that social networks are also influential to the first Canadian bank that they chose. However, it's worth noting that while these networks provide valuable support, they can also sometimes perpetuate outdated or incorrect information. Please stay tuned for more insights to come in our upcoming report. And I want to give back the floor to Narinder and our panelists for the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you for helping set the stage of the discussion for today. So we're going to start with a poll. So in the poll for everyone online, actually, sorry, this is a poll for our panelists. How would you grade Canada's financial system in serving newcomers credit access? So on a scale to 1 to 10, and why? So the question is, how would you grade if you were grading Canada's financial system in serving newcomers credit access? Where would you place that? Amy, do you want to kick us off? Or yeah.
Sure, yeah. So I would say I'd put it at around maybe a 6 to 7, somewhere in there. I think that it's available, like it can be accessed. I think the real challenge I see is that that it's often difficult to access as much as is needed, and that the barriers to be able to get the amount of credit that's necessary are great, so that yeah, it's more of like there's a significant struggle and there's a bunch of disadvantages that newcomers will face to try to access it. So I'd say 6, maybe hopefully moving towards a improvement there.
Sifat, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I just want to preface that pretty much everything that I'm going to be talking about, not just this question, would not only reflect kind of my work experience and what we do with the fund, but also as a newcomer who navigated the system not too long ago. So sprinkled in, you'll find a little bit of my own kind of personal thing. So personally, similar to what Amy was saying, I'd go actually for a 5. And the reason why I say this is because while there are options, realistically, you only really have 5 big banks that you could, 4 to 5 big banks you could really go to for services and accessing credit, which I feel limits your options. And at the end of the day, if you really start comparing what they're doing, they essentially offer the similar products to newcomers with some minor changes in terms of the perks they offer when you first opening a new account as a newcomer, and potentially on some interest rates, which will then eventually fluctuate for whatever time frame you'll be holding those accounts. And additionally, if you look at it beyond the big banks and you look at credit unions, I find that a lot of how you access that really is driven a lot by what I like to call the fiscal culture of the country that you go. And I'm saying this from my own experience and some the banking experience that I had in Bangladesh, and what are those habits that I continue to hold on to when I come here. I find that there's always a lot of learning and unlearning when it comes to moving to Canada, and it really plays a big part in the confidence that newcomers might have. In fact, there was a survey by Interact last year that indicated that at the beginning, when newcomers have high confidence, about 61%, when it comes to their finances and coming to Canada, this dips to almost half and goes down to 30%. When they have to deal with all the challenges, the fiscal and economic challenges that comes with settling down in Canada. And that includes having to access capital, which then begs the question, what is happening? Why is it happening? And what can we really do to solve some of these challenges?
Great, thank you. And I see a question around, are we combining all the types of credit? So it's not just about business credit here. We did take a broader view on the different types of credit. Thank you, Sifat. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks to all of you who are here to listen and hopefully participate and share your thoughts as well. I would give a slightly higher score, 7 or 8, but with a very important caveat, which is that I think there have been great improvements in the provision of credit, personal credit, credit card products, et cetera, to newcomers, bringing them up to or closer to par to what the typical Canadian gets. I think the problem is what the typical Canadian gets. And I think when we're talking about immigration, we often forget that immigrants live in the society with everybody else. And so from our research at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, we do quarterly tracking polls involving 20,000 respondents who are verified adult newcomers. We have a lot of data in this area. The thing that we find most surprising is actually newcomers' concerns tend to mirror the concerns of the general population very, very closely, just living in the same society. And so access to credit, access to business financing and capital in that respect, non-secured, non-guaranteed mortgage debt, et cetera. These are problems across the financial system, which, as Sifat mentioned, is fairly uncompetitive, especially in key domains. And so when it comes to newcomers, yes, there are challenges in accessing credit, but I think less and less by virtue of the fact that they're newcomers, and more by virtue of the fact that they're participants in a financial system that doesn't provision credit very well.
Thank you for that, Daniel.
Yeah.
Bamboo, thoughts on this?
I think I would give it a 6, not as a newcomer myself, but just as a person working in this space, because there has been some exciting news, especially in terms of alternative data usage and international credit history. However, the pace has been a little bit slower than I expected. So it's really encouraging to see these financial institutions start to explore these options. But I'd like to see that it is going to be implemented at a wider level.
Great, thank you. And if you have thoughts on the score, please feel free to put into the chat. So now I want to ask each of you work with newcomers in some capacity. Can you share a bit more about your work and what's one surprising insight you've gained about how newcomers navigate the credit system? Sifat, do you want to kick us off for this?
Yeah, I'd love to. Here at the Mariam Assefa Fund, or MAF as we call our acronym, we use catalytic funding to support bold initiatives that have the potential to really help newcomers achieve their true potential, both in the US and Canada. The fund itself is nested within the Department of Social Impact at the World Education Services, or WES, which is a social enterprise headquartered in New York. And WES specializes in educational credential evaluation for those who are interested to move or study in the US or Canada, and I believe it was established in the 1960s. The fund itself has been operating since 2019, and over the last 6 years, we've had the privilege of supporting over 35 grantee partners across Canada who have been working on a variety of initiatives, whether it's around the pilot certification programs that are centered around migrant worker rights, research to shed light on the insights and challenges that international medical graduates face when they try to enter into the Canadian healthcare system, or in policy and advocacy efforts to support migrant worker rights. Through all of this, I think what's really been amazing to see, and I feel that reflects around access to credit, is that continued resilience that newcomers show and how dedicated they are to making the most of the opportunities that they have to live in Canada. they don't want handouts. That's, I think most of us can say that from our personal experience. They want to be hired based on their skills and expertise. They want decent working conditions. They want to earn an honest, livable wage. And most importantly, they don't want to feel like they've been exploited. And they want to feel like they have a voice when it comes to decision making and policies that continue to impact their lives. And I think this can be said even when it comes to finances, access to credit, and really navigating the complexity that is the Canadian financial system.
Great. Thank you, Danielle.
I always lose the mute button, it disappears. The first words that were spoken in the Parliament after COVID resumption was, would the honourable member please unclick their mute? So there you go, we've been having these problems for a while. The Institute for Canadian Citizenship is a cross-Canada charity that helps newcomers to not just come, but stay, belong, become citizens, succeed, and by virtue of that success, contribute to Canada's future. That's sort of been the secret sauce of the country for hundreds of years, actually, not just recently, and I think will continue to be a strength for us. We do this in two ways. First, I alluded to earlier, we do public policy research in the areas of immigration and citizenship. You may have seen some of our reports in the media in the fall talking about declining immigrant retention rates in Canada. That's an area that we've sort of pioneered research in. I was very surprised when I asked the question that nobody knew. So we decided to find out. We've done that 2 years in a row. We also look at declining naturalization rates and the reasons why. And then we apply those learnings in a real life laboratory, which is called our Canoe program, CANOO, which is an app that some of you may have used before, which provides newcomers to Canada with free access to over 2,000 culture, nature, and sport experiences all across the country. You can save hundreds of dollars. Thousands, some of them, depending on what you go for. And this is a way for us to apply what we've learned to make Canada stickier and to help people get through the tough period in those early years when we know that the risk of departure is highest. So that program also creates a ton of data. Just to give you some sense of it, we have over 830,000 people who are enrolled in the program, and well, half of them are children. We do hundreds of thousands of experiences per year across Canada, and by virtue of that scale, we're able to learn a lot about who newcomers are and what they're after. Your question briefly about like what are sort of one thing I've noticed. I think one thing that I've noticed is that there have been these two very contrary trajectories in the immigration world overall. The one is selection, where our selection policy has become much more competitive. We now reject in the express entry system 96% of people in the pool, right? Which is about Harvard University level of admissions competitiveness. And so the typical immigrant coming through the point system has become much more elite educationally and professionally than they were even 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And yet our services have basically not changed at all. The number one IRCC funded service for settlement is language classes, even though all the PRs today have to prove that they speak the language in order to even get the card that makes them eligible to receive the services. Only 18% of primary economic immigrants are using IRCC settlement services within their first year on arrival. And that number continues to drop very quickly. So there's a very big disconnect between who is being selected to come or permitted or admitted into the country and the types of services that we're providing. And so our view is that, we get it wrong. Immigration is not a favor that we do to people from around the country. In fact, they do an honor to us by deciding that they want to come and play on our team, and it's up to us as the receiving society to make sure that they're able to contribute to the fullest, and that we provide a winning experience that makes them want to stay, because global talent has global options. And so we've tried to sort of reverse the paradigm and disseminate that through our research, but also in the way that we provide service through Canoe.
Great, thank you. Amy?
Thanks. Yeah. So I work for Coast Capital, which is one of Canada's largest credit unions, so direct financial service provider. And my role within our organization is within our strategy and member experience division. So really what I'm doing on a daily basis is taking kind of a human-centered design approach to the way we apply our services, but also think about our strategy. And so Coast Capital one of the pillars of our strategy is that we're a social purpose organization, and one of the pillars of that social purpose is to foster a more inclusive financial system. And so work like this around, so one of my kind of pieces of work that I was working on was around understanding the newcomer banking experience, understanding kind of what the landscape looks like, and what are the kind of challenges and kind of the newcomer journey, even just outside of banking. And so, and then being able to evaluate how well do our products and services actually meet those needs that we see, and where do we have opportunities for improvement, and advocating for those changes. And so one of the things that I would say most kind of surprised me when I was getting deeper into the research was around how the access to credit for newcomers is often hindered because they're viewed as more risky. There's less credit history to go by. They might have more income, like job volatility. However, the actual delinquency rates on those credit facilities are lower than the national average. So I think one of the studies that I came across by Equifax was about 20% lower. And so there's this kind of, you're being penalized by being viewed as like more risky, where in reality, you would be a better candidate than the average Canadian potentially. So yeah, that's one thing that I found surprising and stood out to me.
Yeah, Daniel?
Actually,
Yeah.
just a question that I had. So Bamboo, when you talked about discrepancies in terms of like auto mortgage and auto loans and mortgage rates. I mean, mortgage rates to some extent can be explained by the fact that when you first arrive, you may not be able to afford a house with which to get a mortgage, or upon which to get a mortgage. But on auto and stuff like that, could part of this also be just aversion to debt and cultural aversion to debt, the desire to be on your sort of best behavior, pay off all your bills, not run a balance? I just wonder if your research touched upon that.
Yeah, exactly. I think for mortgage, that definitely like time plays the length of time you spend in Canada definitely plays a role. But here, I think by definition, the recent immigrants includes those who came here like within like 0 to 5 years. So there's a portion of them actually did that for mortgage. And the auto thing, like we haven't found any like evidence showing that might be a cultural thing. But in our research, by talking to like newcomers in the communities and also some community partners, definitely like I think cultural financial behavior is a really big factor by driving people's behavior. I save a lot until I buy something. I think that's normal, right? And I think that is a validated point to support that discrepancy.
It reminds me of my childhood, growing up, child of immigrants. We were savers. Our family was savers, not spenders, and not prone to taking out debt outside of a mortgage. So there is a really important cultural point into that. Thank you for calling that out. And Bamboo, any other thoughts on like the one insight for you in terms of a surprising insight on how newcomers are navigating?
Yeah, I think just one very short thing I want to notice is that actually newcomers, they understand the importance of credit history and they start to build that under day one. But many of them are actually unaware of the nuances in growing their credit score. For example, they only check or monitor that pretty regularly when they need that, but it takes time. Or like they're not like, even for me, personal experience, I was not aware of the credit utilization at first. So I only have one credit card, which makes it very hard to meet that 30% threshold. I think there's some tricks and also like tips that you can take from that process.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's jump deeper into the challenges for credit access. So traditional credit models don't always work well for newcomers. Can you share a few real life examples of how this has impacted someone you've worked with or known or yourself? And maybe Amy and Sifat, would love to have your thoughts on this.
So I can maybe speak to this. So I'll approach this more from a like research perspective, because that's more where my work's taken me. And so I see a couple of challenges in particular with the credit model. One, we already talked about your credit history. The fact that there's such a kind of national boundary to that any credit history that you have from other countries is very difficult to access in Canada. I know it was brought up that there are options to have an international credit history or be able to pull that in. But I believe most of the financial institutions, big banks and credit unions are still kind of early days. Not a lot of them are using that type of international credit score. So that as a newcomer, you may be someone who has been exemplary in the way you've handled credit in your country of origin, and that history, that credit worthiness is not coming with you. So I see that as a challenge, along with because there's such a national boundary to the credit, then there's whole groups like folks that are in a temporary status in Canada that have a difficulty at all accessing credit, because most credit grantors are pretty wary of providing credit to someone who, if they should go delinquent and leave the country, your recourse to be able to recoup those debts is pretty limited. So I think all of those are challenges within the credit model, along with, I think I mentioned as well, that we see a lot of newcomers have income volatility, or I should say job volatility, where you may be accepting a job that is less than kind of what you're qualified to do. You may be seeking kind of a better job, and so a credit grantor is going to be looking for employment stability, and so that kind of there's that intersectionality there of trying to earn and get established, but that journey to try to get the best job possible it's really taking advantage of all your skills and education is also penalizing you when you're applying for credit, as you're seeing kind of more job switching within the newcomer group. So yeah, those I think are all some challenges where the credit model is not working for newcomers.
I want to build up on Amy's example a little bit, and then share a very personal experience in response to how the current credit models or traditional ones don't work. I think one of the groups that continuously are left out is refugee claimants. I think given that status, I think first of all, understanding the difference between a contingent refugee and then refugee claimants and how support looks like from them is very different, and under most circumstances, refugee claimants get left out. Even if we talk something about as simple as financial literacy for them to join programs so they could learn, a lot of programs aimed at helping newcomers explicitly leave out refugee claimants. So even if someone came in wanting to understand the system, wanting to be knowledgeable so that they can understand what credit looks like, is very challenging because they get left out of these models. So there's definitely a way where we can explore how these underrepresented groups can learn more about the system and learn more about what their options are. The personal, very deeply personal experience that I want to share about is that when I landed in Canada a couple of years ago, and was opening a bank account, I actually got locked out of my RBC account. And the reason for that was because my account was fraudulently being accessed outside of Ontario. So, and I was based in Ontario, so obviously the bank, out of security purposes, flagged that. And mind you, at the time, I was only eligible for one single credit card with a 2,000 limit. So that already tells you how low the threshold is. Like 2,000 even 5 years ago is nothing. It's nothing to pay your basic expenses. It's nothing to cover your rent. So you can imagine how stressed I was. And it was even more stressful because I was about to put a deposit to secure accommodation in Toronto. And so now I'm locked out of my account. I can't make a transfer. I can't access my money in any way. I can't access my savings. Forget the credit card. I couldn't even access my savings. But to echo on that dependency or how newcomers lean into their social network, I was extremely lucky to have close family friends with whom I was living who were willing to loan me that money to secure the deposit. No questions asked, no hesitation. And on top of that, they took me several times from Oakville to North York, where my bank account had been set up at the time, which took approximately 2 weeks. So that back and forth took several days to sort out. So it wasn't like I just showed up at the bank account saying, please release it, give me access to my credit, give me access to my, or give me an alternative credit card so I could use it, or any of that sort. It was a complete no, right? And I was new to Canada. I'm completely unfamiliar with how banking norms are. And I just didn't feel confident to be able to advocate for myself. And, and I had never felt so helpless before in my life. And it took those close family friends to be the ones to advocate for me, to be the ones to argue with the bank and say, and one of them just happened to be an RBC employee herself. So she was just like, I know the system, I know what you can do, this is what you should be doing, escalated this. So it took someone with deep knowledge of the banking system to advise me. And that is not a privilege everybody has. Not all of us has that in our social network. And to be honest, I think my story probably isn't unique. It probably resonates with a number of newcomers. And I think what it shows again is that dependency on that social network to support newcomers as they kind of navigate the challenges of trying to access credit, trying to open a personal bank account in Canada, because financial institutions aren't always empathetic to our situation, and nor will they always understand the urgency with why we need certain issues resolved expeditiously, because they have their own policies and procedures in place. So you could ask for it, you could say, please do this, do this, do this, can you help me? And they'd be like, I have this policy in place, I have to do this has to be escalated to the credit, and it's a whole different thing. And if you're not familiar with it, it can be a lot. It can be a lot of information that's just dumped on you.
Yeah, it touches on just the value of navigation and effective navigation in this space. From your perspective, what are the biggest barriers to credit approval in the current system, and what can be done to fix them? Daniel, maybe I'll turn it over to you for this.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that the biggest problems in the credit system for newcomers are the biggest problems in the credit system for Canada, and it's part of the reason why we see so few companies, especially early stage companies, capitalized by the major banks, having to secure a loan against a property, for example, for commercial purposes. Really shuts out a lot of people, especially people who are newer to the country, who are far less likely to own a property in Canada than others. So I think we do have many very well-known, trying to find a non-pejorative term here, like, parochialisms, if you like, that are embedded into the financial system, as in many of our systems. And, I think part of the irony of all this is that newcomers are being asked to get an education about the Canadian financial system. But it's almost like a history lesson, because we have people coming from countries that have no paper currency anymore, that have street vendors who can do everything on the app, where being unbanked is almost no longer a phenomenon, and are coming here to a place where, we don't have paper deposit slips anymore, but we're not far removed. Our healthcare system works on fax machines, and they're wondering why they need to be educated to be brought up to quote Canadian standards. So I think that the irony here is that we have so much to learn in terms of financial innovation, safe provision of credit, ability to have higher repayments, lower default rates, through all sorts of different financial mechanisms, from micro lending to payments, and even larger style lending that can allow for a competitive economy where newcomers' assets can be put to use for Canada's benefit and, of course, for their own. And so I think we have a bigger issue here about financial innovation that's really holding us back as a country, and the issues newcomers experience, I think, just really draw attention to it because they know different. In many cases, they know different, and are able to draw attention to some of these deficiencies that all of us, I think, would be well served to try to address.
Yeah, no, I agree. I spent many years working in microfinance in West Africa, and some of the technology we're using was light years ahead of Canada. So a lot of reverse innovation there that is possible. We do have a question from the chat. I'll just add in here is wondering if any panelists could comment on whether or how sending money back to the home country affects immigrants' ability to access credit, even when they have stable incomes because they have less savings in Canada. Any thoughts on that?
I guess I can take this question.
Yeah.
I think from where I stand, I don't see, like, at least from the research or from like interacting with the financial institutions, that's the amount of saving is a problem, because when they are doing the credit assessment, they are more care about, like, do you pay your bill up? Do you pay your like credit on time? Like the repayments, this is something they care more about. I think the amount of saving or like your employment, your income is more a concern when they're giving you the credit limits. For example, if you're applying for a credit card, that could be a concern. But I think in the further like credit assessment, I don't really think like lower saving is one.
I
Well,
could
it
maybe
almost, oh, go on, sorry.
Sorry,
Amy.
yeah, no, I'll comment on that because I think it depends on the credit facility. So if it is something that is like a mortgage or a secure, then yes, your savings might not play a large role. But if it's unsecured, something like a line of credit, then typically actually what you're allowed is a proportion of what your like demonstrated net worth is. So having lower savings or lower wealth in Canada will impact how much you can access or what you would be offered as a limit. So I'd say potentially that could be a challenge, and that would kind of restrict how much at least you would be offered.
It'd be interesting for banks and credit unions to see it as an asset, as a marker of consistency in evaluation, and then potentially in some cases a marker of not having the assets or whatever that may be. Okay, we're going to move over to structural and cultural barriers. So we know that some newcomers come from cultures where debt, and we discussed this, so Daniel, I know you pulled this out, where debt is discouraged. Yet in Canada, credit history is essential. So how do we bridge this gap and better integrate them into the Canadian financial system? Sifat, Bamboo, perhaps I'll start with the two of you.
Yeah, I could take a stab at this question. I think I alluded a little bit to this at the beginning as well, is that, a lot of it is really understanding the fiscal culture of where immigrants come from. And a lot of it is kind of low risk, savings based, not really going into too much debt, which is different here in Canada. I'm not going to say opposite, because I think what this really requires, in my opinion, is more tailored support. And this is perhaps a place where maybe even pre-arrival services or other service provision organizations could potentially work to improve the financial literacy of newcomers as it pertains to Canada. I know a lot of SPOs are already doing that. They have connections with credit unions and others who they bring in to have information sessions to talk about that. But what I want to say is that I think it's important to understand from newcomers that there is such a thing as good debt. This is a new concept for a number of newcomers. It's a new concept for me. Right? There's good debt is a thing, and that consistent paying habits can go a long way in improving one's credit score. And I think another way to kind of like really bridge the gap and like open up opportunities for newcomers in accessing credit is really continuing to offer services in the native language of the newcomers. Because I think some of that technical linguistics could be lost in English, but if you could translate that into their native languages, they have a better chance of understanding what they're about to get into. Or if they have follow-up queries, they can ask you more questions about whatever it is the product that you are offering to them when it comes to credit. And I think banks are doing better at addressing this. I know that RBC, for example, has staff in multiple different branches, and I think something like over 100 languages by their employees are spoken if you look at their entire kind of language database. So I think the banks are doing a good job in kind of understanding that. But what I really want to emphasize here is that when it comes to kind of bridging that gap and helping newcomers better kind of understand the financial system and better get into it, is that there is no magic bullet. There's no one size fits all approach. If you want to support newcomers to gain access to credit, we have to understand where they're coming from, explore other options for credit assessment, and even look at perhaps alternative methods to access credit products and loans that really addresses some of the systematic barriers that newcomers face, especially for those who might not have enough credit history in Canada. And I think even StatsCan published a really interesting report in 2023, which I think would not come to a lot of surprise to those working in this field, where they did point out that because of the type of debt that newcomers have to show, which is either it's a cell phone bill or it's a very low limit credit card, these don't go a very long way in terms of building up your credit. And so, even that research paper indicated that credit bureaus and other kind of financial institutions could capture data from non-traditional methods such as rent, phone, and utility payments as a way to kind of bolster up the credit score for newcomers. So there's opportunities to explore that.
Great. Thank you, Sifat. Bamboo, any kind of brief thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I think on top of the tailored support, I want to emphasize on the importance of social networks and the broader communities, because sometimes I feel like newcomers does not need theoretic resources to help them understand. Rather, they just need relatable, practical stories and examples, maybe from their social networks, to let them know, okay, there's some good that you can take that. It actually help you to build your credit. Yeah, that's my brief thought.
Great. Thank you. Amy, so you are at a financial institution. If you could redesign the way financial institutions assess credit worthiness for newcomers, what would be the key change and how realistic is the shift?
So I think what Daniel shared before around, the credit system Canada-wide being challenging, I think one of the things that I see is that there's such a high need to demonstrate assurance, like mitigate all risks before any credit is given, that that certainly disadvantages newcomers. But this does mean that the amount of credit given is often much smaller than what people would need to be able to operate their daily life or kind of achieve the goals that they have. So I would say one thing that I would love to see would be, and I've heard of this concept where the actual cash flow into an account helps to kind of give assurance of what is coming in or what this person has coming in, and credit can increase with the evidence of more payment history, more incoming cash flow. So I've heard of this example in, say, businesses where an institution can see the point of sale kind of income that will be coming in based on sales on a regular basis and can extend credit based on this anticipated income coming in. And so, yeah, I would love to see, and I think it was brought up, other forms of history and ways of demonstrating credit worthiness factored into the amount that people can qualify for, and for credit to be able to grow with the person. Because I think that's also something we don't really see very often is, so say you get approved for a small credit card or line of credit, and then you have great payment history, there's not really a process typically to continue extending more and more proactively and allow that credit facility to grow with the individual and that credit, proven credit payment history. It's more reactive, waiting for the applicant to come back and ask for more. So would love to see kind of ways, particularly I think in the business sphere, we know that small businesses are always seeking additional credit to be able to grow and operate more effectively. And so especially in that sphere, if we could kind of grow credit facilities with the borrower, I think that would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think a few of you have hit on this risk aversion. And so, kind of as a part, when we think about the future of Canada and our economic productivity, feels like a disconnect for so many of our institutions and capital flowers, even philanthropy, to be honest, being extremely risk averse. So something definitely we need to solve for as we move forward. Daniel?
You might want to call that achievement averse. I think that I mean, look, everything is right that we've said, and I think the most promising thing that I've seen come out in the last couple of years, and now there are a few different players that offer this, and Ocoho offers it, and quite a few others, is credit history, application of rent payments, right? I mean, rent is a promise to pay a bill. I sign a lease saying I will pay you this much every month, and it's it's only prepaid for that month, but it's not prepaid for the year. And you deliver on those payments, and having landlords being able to register timely and complete rent payments is a huge sign of credit worthiness, and is now starting to come up with very affordable services that are like $5 a month or something that can allow you to register these payments and have them counted directly with Equifax. So I think we have made some strides. We have made some strides here, but yeah, overall, it's a Canadian financial system thing. It's a competition and competitiveness thing, you know. And until open banking and real-time rail and all that kind of stuff comes through, the competitive landscape will continue to be limited, and so risk aversion will continue to be a profitable strategy. I think you know, changing the environment to one in which that type of aversion doesn't pay, I think can really help to unleash Canadian innovation. And the good news is that we have so many newcomers here with direct financial sector experience, not just as customers, but as employees, as entrepreneurs, who can help to show us a way. And that's a uniquely Canadian advantage. I mean, there are immigrants everywhere, but in terms of the proportion and the real pedigree or the caliber, professionally and educationally, of the people who come to Canada, we're really well set up if we decide to put this resource to proper use.
Great, thank you. And let's continue on this thread as we close out the conversation and open up if there are more questions from the group. But, you know, what is that, you know, what gives you hope in this moment? I think, Daniel, you shared kind of the future of what this could look like. Anything to add before we pass it on to others?
I mean, hope is one of those big words. I think that we do have an opportunity. Like right now in Canada, we're trying to sort of reassess what it means to be Canadian in our relationship with the United States. And I was telling a group of people yesterday, like, I think the first thing we need to do is give a PR card to the Statue of Liberty, and recognize that being welcoming of people who want to play for our team has been really the strongest strength that's been working in Canada's favor for hundreds of years. And now that we're at this juncture, I think we need to recognize, like, I wrote an op-ed for the Toronto Star in January rather, saying, you know, well, what if we had this, you know, army of hundreds of thousands of people with high-level commercial contacts in countries around the world who could help us to diversify our trade relationships? Oh, wait, we do. And I'd say the same thing is true of finance. Like, this is an area which is like high tech, which we select for, and countries like India, which we also select for, you know, are really leading the way in a lot of these respects. So my hope, to the extent that I have some, is that, you know, the resources are here, the assets are here. We don't have to go digging or go fishing. What we need is a mentality shift about who immigrants are and what they can achieve, and that immigration is not something that we do out of compassion. It is something that we do out of ambition. And until we realize that, we'll continue to make mistakes and squander talent. And we'll be having conversations like this one for the future, which I hope we don't have. So in this moment of rethinking, I hope that we can also rethink who is here and who is Canadian and what they have to offer, and make more people. Immigrants to the country are very, very willing to give, and we should say yes.
Great. Sifat, your one hope.
Oh, that's a big thing. I think one hope that I do want to see is echoing what Daniel said, that mentality shift. I want to loop back to a conversation that we had with some of our other grantee partners at the Metropolis conference that took place in Toronto earlier in March. And our session was specifically focusing on discussing how do we stop viewing immigrants as some sort of commodity and dollar sign, and change the conversation about, as Daniel was saying, like, don't see what you can get out of them, but rather center it around human rights, dignity, dignified work, and kind of looking at them as human beings and not as things you can use. So I think that once we have that mentality shift, I think we hope to see a trickle-down effect into all aspects, whether it's access to credit, whether it's housing, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, right? I mean, don't get me started on healthcare. If you look at the data, again, huge discrepancy, not only in communities within Toronto, that's, if we use that example, that geographic, but like within racial groups as well. So, and with newcomers as well. So I think these are huge things that need to be addressed. And my hope is that as we start looking at the value that newcomers can bring, that looks beyond what they can add, how much they can put into your banking system,
Yeah.
and things like that, and rather, how much tax you can get out of them, but rather, what can we do to make them feel like Canada is home?
Yeah. Thank you.
I would say.
Thank you. Amy?
So for me, I would say a couple things. I think that view of newcomers is shifting. I think, it was brought up in the study that you went over of like how much of Canada's population growth is coming from newcomers. And Daniel had brought up the caliber of newcomers that are coming in. And we see that in our research as well. So I think that there is a shifting narrative within the banking space of like, this is a highly desirable market. And that the products and services that we have been offering to all of Canadians do have some additional challenges for newcomers. So I think that I've seen a greater appetite for innovation and a desire to reconsider some of the products and services and the way they're adjudicated to be able to make them more accessible to newcomers. And I'd say with that, so I think that is hopeful to me, along with, I think the research I'd seen, it's about by year 10 where newcomers and non-newcomers like are about on equal playing field of where the challenges that newcomers face have pretty much diminished to where they are, accessing financial services at the same rates and all of that. So I would say for me, my hope would be that's a long time to wait, and that gap, it continues to diminish through greater innovation, and to where there is no difference, or to Daniel's points earlier, that access to credit is easier for all Canadians, whether you are a newcomer to Canada or not.
Yeah, thank you. And Bamboo?
Yeah, one last thing I want to add is that I hope Canada could apply the same approach to credit as it has to employment. As we see, like Canadian employers are now more recognize their global work experience by removing the so-called Canadian experience. And I'm very hopeful for like what is coming next for credit.
Great, thank you. I feel like there's this huge opportunity to get unstuck across the way we flow capital. So thank you all for joining us today. I know we're just slightly over time, but I do want to take a moment to thank Amy, Daniel, Sifat, Bamboo for bringing your depth of knowledge into this conversation. We do hope to have you join us in person in May, and more information will be shared shortly, and we'll send over the report in the next month as well. Big thanks to Wes, who actually enabled this work and our deep dive into newcomers, immigrants, and refugees and their capital access, and to all of our partners, including Coast Capital, Duca, Ontario Trillium Foundation, Inspirit, Vancouver Foundation, and Jumpstart, who are some of the core partners powering New Power Labs. So on that, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panelists, and really excited to continue this conversation as we move forward. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.